for an EICR, mate? If you've ever wondered what an EICR should look like, it shouldn't be done from somebody's van, and we often call them in the industry a drive-by report. And usually what you'll find with that is someone might spend a maximum of half an hour to 45 minutes in your property and then use evidence such as pictures that they've taken very briefly on site to produce as many non-compliances incurred as they can to generate remedial work that might not be required. And ultimately, they're leaving you at risk of being prosecuted because of an EICR that isn't accurate, isn't valid, doesn't hold the right data and information, and doesn't ensure safety. So if we are doing an EICR, what should it look like and how long should it take on site? Let's go find out. Welcome back to the channel. It's Mark from Powersonic and Apprentice 121, and as you'll have seen with my little intro on this video, we're going to be looking at EICRs, and in particular the new, well, say new, but the PRS rules and exactly what they mean, exactly what your obligations are, and what an EICR should look like. We do have issues within the industry of EICRs that aren't completed correctly. There are some contractors out there who aren't doing things in the way that they should be doing, and this little video is to try and highlight what one should look like and some of the red flag warning signs you can look out for as a landlord, homeowner, letting agent, whatever you may be, and hopefully help you make the right decision in selecting an electrician to make sure property you're responsible for is electrically safe. So there is quite a bit of guidance out there that can help you, and one of the things that I recommend is this from NAPIT. So this is the Landlords and Electrical Inspectors Guide for the Private Rented Sector, and it explains in here exactly what the responsibilities are for landlords and letting agents. It explains to electricians what we need to be doing as well. It has some really good solid information in there, along with some of the basics that are always good to freshen people's minds with, samples of the documents, and it explains some of the legal responsibilities. And speaking about this, I am just talking as a contractor based in England. The rules are different around the UK, so it's well worth checking for your particular area exactly what laws are in place, because I know, for example, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland have different measures to what we do in England. But looking at the purpose of the PRS system, essentially it's to try and improve the standards of electrical safety in private rented properties. And the tool of implement that the powers that be have chosen is EICRs. And you had until, for existing tenancies, till April the 1st, 2021, which has just passed, to ensure that your properties are up to a safe and habitable standard, and if not, that remedial action is taken. So usually what happens is you will have an EICR carried out, and then you are given 28 days or less, depending on what the inspector has said, for potentially dangerous things to be corrected, and certification for those corrections and the original report to be made available to the occupier/tenant, and equally be readily accessible to the local authority should they wish to see evidence of it. So there's quite a lot of responsibility there on landlords and people who are renting premises to end users to ensure that things are electrically safe. So one of the things that we do see as a gripe in industry is to do with what we call very cheap, low value, low quality inspections. And I don't want to associate this just on price, because there are some contractors who go in at a low value and they do reports correctly, and they're basing that initial charge on generating a long-term relationship with the client, for example, or from picking up on the whole remedial work that they will make more money on. We all set up our businesses in different ways, so it's not purely on price, but generally speaking, you do find contractors who are selling these things for 60 to 80 pounds. They're spending less than an hour in somebody's home, and when you actually drill down into it, is that the right amount of time we want to allocate to someone's safety? And not just that, to ensure that you have the compliance and the documentation in place to prove that you discharged your duty of care to those occupants in the event of an incident. So often when we talk about that, we're looking at a judge being involved, for example. That's the fear factor that some people often strike down onto others, that eventually if something does happen and you have used one of these rogue contractors, and these contractors aren't outside of the schemes within our industry. A lot of them are badged up in the full way. They're quite hard to spot, and I'm going to explain a few things in this video that can hopefully help you filter out a good contractor. We'll get to that later on. But if you're really looking at keeping yourself the right side of the law, the responsibility is on you to ensure that these works have been carried out correctly. So it's your obligation. It's you who is going to be stood in front of that judge, and you want the strongest supporting evidence you can muster if you are ever in that situation. Believe me, and it does happen. It does happen. But aside from all of that, I mean, if there was to be an incident in a property you own, speaking personally, if it was myself, and if it was to do with anything, not just electric, if it was to do with Legionnaires or a gas leak or whatever else, and I hadn't done everything I could to make sure that property was safe, I'm not sure I would be able to live a full and happy life with the knowledge that I contributed to someone else receiving an injury, or at worst, dying. You know, that's ultimately what we're talking about. You know, that's a heavy burden for someone to carry, and for the sake of saving a few quid here and there, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that's an exchange that's worth taking. So there are some key things you can do to make sure you provide yourself with a reputable contractor who's going to carry out the work correctly to the best of their ability and put you in the strongest position possible of having a safe property to give out to other people. And we're going to run through that in this video. But there are other documents as well that you can reference, and this is speaking to the contractors out there. So obviously we've got Guidance Note 3, and I've spoke about this before in my other videos. That gives us basically the process of inspecting and testing. There's also the on-site guide, which has some useful information, and then there's code breakers as well, which is another excellent publication from NAPIT. And all of those things can guide you. Some people make the mistake of using those things as a Bible to electrical inspection and testing. Ultimately, the best tool you've got for an electrical safety condition report, electrical installation condition report, is this person. It's you. So it's the electrician, using your engineering judgment, trusting in your ability and training. You know, often we see a lot of content out on social media or on YouTube with opinion and guidance, and people saying that it should be like this, it should be like that. And often that can confuse and muddy the waters, and this video could just be another one of those things as well. You really need to trust in yourself and your training, experience and knowledge. You're the person with the installation in front of you. You're the person who's inspecting and testing it, and as long as you do that diligently with the right intentions, you will never go far wrong. But we're going to pop out onto site now, and we're going to have a little run through what an EICR should look like, and then we're going to have a little chat about some of the red flags that would indicate that you might not be receiving what's required, and some of the things you can ask for to try and ensure you get a contractor who's going to look after your best interests. So let's jump out onto site and get a look through it all. So we've got a bit of a safety announcement here, and I've got to thank Neil Bridgman from UK's Rail who made me aware of this, and I'll link a video from the IET somewhere up here. So they did that video with Spen, and I recommend you go off and watch it. But one of the key safety things we can now do as part of our safe isolation process, or I certainly think it should be part of that, is to clamp the earth onto the property and see if you've got any leakage current in it. Now that's not for what you might be thinking, so we're looking for diverted neutral currents and to see if we have current flowing through the earthing on an installation before we disconnect the earth and make ourselves part of that circuit. So I'm thinking of ZE measurements. This is on a TNCS PME, and you could have current and therefore voltage on the earthing system, and when you disconnect it, if you're around earth metallic services within the understairs cupboard, for example, or even here I've got an external gas pipe, if this was to have placed in for me to measure ZE. So I'm really thinking of somebody who's under the stairs, and I've got a little picture that I'll pop up here as well actually that shows a good example of it. So it's well worth carrying out that check. Watch that video, it explains it far better than I can. But yeah, that's just a little safety announcement. If you actually think about our EICRs and PRS, one of the things that an electrician should be looking at is your main intake position. So they need to check your service fuse and all of the metering equipment, as you'll see inside of here. And if we move along to this other cupboard here, they will also be checking the bonding conductors and usually using a wander lead to verify connection. So you can measure the continuity of that conductor. And a wander lead is basically quite a long green wire that you may see an electrician wandering around your property with while they're carrying out the EICR. And the rule of thumb figure is 0.05 ohms. Some people are set in stone on that. You can have quite long runs with bonding conductors. It can at times exceed that measurement, and you need to reference into the regulations to see what that value should be. But one of the primary issues with an EICR, well, not issues, one of the primary things that an electrician should be doing is the inspection process. So we're going to run through that first. We're going to see what an electrical inspection looks like. So this is before we get into any testing, and we're going to run inside and look around the property and go beyond some of these external meter cabinets. Let's go and do that now. So they're also going to have to isolate the property from the supply of electricity, and this is the thing that occupants usually notice the most, because that's when the power's going off, and it will be off for a sustained period while they carry out inspections within the consumer unit itself and also around some of the various accessories within the property. You can't go opening those live, you should always be isolated, and we're going to go through that now. We also go through the process of locking off. So if we start with the basics of just tripping the RCBOs in this case from the supply and turning off the main switch, and we'll get a lock on there and we'll have an open up of the consumer unit and see what we've got inside and explain some of the checks that need to be made inside there. We've got locked off on the main switch now, and the supply is isolated, and it's important we do that so we can work safely whilst carrying out our inspections and some of our dead tests, as we call them, and that's the process of continuity testing, insulation resistance testing, and some of the polarity checks we need to make, amongst others. And we can run around and do those now. So if you've got an electric within your property, they should be carrying out those tests in a safe manner. They shouldn't be working live and opening things up with the supply on. So if you've got them inside your property and they're doing that, essentially it's termed as live working. So you need to ensure that while those inspections are made and accessories are removed, that they're working as safely as possible. And we'll show you some of those examples in this video as well as we move around some of the accessories now and have a look inside. I'm not going to run through the whole process of the tests. I've gone through that on other videos already, and I think it's important that we don't give instruction on how you do these things. You should be selecting suitably trained and qualified people who would already know. This is just a kind of a video to give you an idea of what to expect. And a lot of the time the electrician is going to be spending around your consumer unit. They have to disconnect most of the conductors within there to carry out the range of tests they need to do. It's not something that you can quickly zip through in a few minutes, and then obviously you've got to reinstate all of those things, often tidy up some of the mesh you come across inside these boards, because through the process of doing the testing you might as well redress some of them back in as tidy a manner as possible. You're also checking your earthing and bonding conductors that we spoke about, checking for the general condition of terminations, so you've got your supply tails coming into the main switch there, amongst many other things. But basically I'm just trying to emphasize the point that it will take time to run through that work. So we need to make an inspection of switches and sockets. So you'll see your electrician removing front covers, checking behind to see if we've got earthing conductors, that we have sleeving, grommets, that the terminations are correctly into the back of the accessory and that they're tight. And equally later on in the stage of the EICRs, to carry out test readings. So let's look at some of the other accessories that might be taken apart. So one of the other accessories an electrician's going to want to see behind is a socket front, and that's again to check cable terminations, that all the conductors are there and polarities correct by a visual inspection. Also the CPC's there, that we have the appropriate grommets in the back box and that it's fixed adequately to the wall. Also to inspect if we have USB outlets like this that can affect some of the dead testing measurements we carry out, and that we are able to do those safely, along with carrying out a count up of the number of accessories on each circuit. So you'll see if you're going through the process of opening up all of these accessories, it takes a period of time, and it's certainly something that you can't do from a van. So we'll carry on looking at around some of the other accessories that electricians are going to need to see inside. Okay, they're also going to want to see inside the ceiling rose points of the lighting within the installation, and any spotlights or other light fittings that might be in there, and that's to check for the correct polarity, that there is earthing, CPCs, and everything is correctly terminated and safe and sound. And that's all before we move on to any of the dead and live tests, and again we'll touch on some of those later on in this video. We're also going to want to check downlights and ensure that they're terminated correctly, that they have CPCs taken to them, and that there is no basic insulation visible outside the termination point, as is very common. Also, that if they need to be, they're fire rated, that they haven't been mounted too close to any of the timbers within the ceiling structure, and that the basically the fire properties of the ceiling are retained. And this one looks pretty good. Okay, you'll see here I've got the TIS light mate connected into the pendant. I've got the earth crock clip on the earth bar up there, and I can carry out my ZS measurement without being on my steps, without being exposed to any live terminations, because obviously isolate the supply from this circuit while I make these connections, re-energize the circuit, carry out the test, and then reverse that procedure to disconnect everything and make sure you're not exposing yourself to any danger, or as little danger as possible. And yeah, that's one of the things that you should see through the course of your EICR within any premises, and certainly during a PRS check, and that is that electricians will have probes such as these into all of the accessories throughout the property to gather the test results needed, all the way through the dead and the live tests. There's a range of some of the equipment that an electrician's going to need to use whilst carrying out your EICR. You can see here we've got the multifunction test instrument, we've got the crock clips, leads, some basic hand tools that are VDE rated ideally. We've got a proving unit so we can carry out the safe isolation, the torque driver for making sure our terminations are back to manufacturer's spec, the lockout kit, voltage indicators, proving unit. So there's a whole range of stuff, and if you've got an electrician coming out into your premises, this is the kind of thing they're going to need. It's not just a smartphone taking pictures and making up reports in vans and offices, because ultimately that's not going to give you the information or compliance that you need. So you'll have seen running through that process that I've just outlined earlier on in this video, that it's not something that can be completed from a van or within half an hour or 45 minutes. To carry out that EICR properly takes time. So there's the external inspections of all of the circuit accessories to check that they're not broken or damaged. There's then internal inspection of accessible parts within the installation to make sure that everything is as it should be. And then the process of tests, both dead and live. So you should notice periods with the electricity off, and then you should also have the electrician wandering around the property to gather the results they need, take photographs of any damages they've identified, and they will enter all of that information into the EICR document itself to provide you with as much information as possible, because it's you as the duty holder who has to ensure compliance and that your property is safe to be let and habited, not the electricians. They're just there to report on what's in front of them, and that's why it's an electrical installation condition report. Now, if that report contains a lot of the word limb, that's a big red flag, because that means that that particular test has been missed or omitted, and in that case you have no idea of the outcome of that test or inspection. Now, there would be valid reasons for that to be used at times, and that could be to do with what's connected into the circuit during live tests. So for example, you might not be able to do a full range of insulation resistance testing based on what's connected into the electrical system. Equally, it could be if there's not access to a particular part of the installation because the occupants have a lot of equipment and have their own personal possessions that are in the way, or something else that could come up during the day of the work itself, which is called an operational limitation. So there aren't appropriate places to use that, but if you see through the schedule of test results the word limb, and on the inspections the word limb, essentially you've not had an EICR at all. You've had a lot of excuses as to why an EICR hasn't been performed, and typically that's what you'll find a lot of in these drive-by reports. So that's something you need to be really conscious and aware of. But we've spoken a little bit about the bad practice that goes on, and this video is to try and promote the good contractors out there and help you select them to carry out the work for you, because ultimately there's a lot of people like that who just want the opportunity to do this work and to ensure that your electrical installation is safe. They're not there to rip you off. So when you go shopping on price and you've been given a quote of £80–90 and someone's telling you they can be in and out under an hour, that can sound quite attractive as a client, a customer, as opposed to somebody who's saying they want 4 to 6 hours on site and they want getting on for £300 or more to do the inspection. So don't just base it all on what you're paying and assuming that you're getting value for that money, because is it good value to pay £80 for example and have someone do a quick hour run around your property and miss something, or produce a quote for lots of remedial work you don't need? Or is it well worthwhile spending that money to ensure your electrical installation is properly checked, to ensure that it's safe for people to use, And in the event of something going wrong, that you've got strong evidence that you did everything you could to ensure that that property was electrically safe, I would encourage you that that's money well spent. And again, referencing back to earlier on in the video, it isn't just all about what this actually costs. Some contractors will go in at a lower price point because they're looking to grow their client base, for example, or because they have smaller overheads than another set of contractors. There are other reasons why they might not be charging as much as somebody else. It's not all on price. But generally speaking, the way that this PRS system's popped up and the mass marketing of some of the contractors out there to generate business through it, that's what you tend to see. The in and out of properties really quickly, single engineers getting through between 4 and 6 properties a day, and then utilising software to filter through the results they're recording and make them look on paper as if they've been done properly, but ultimately they haven't. And one of the key things you can check as an end user is that schedule of test results, because they will have to give what's called a circuit chart. So it's a list of all the circuits within the installation. Make sure you check that against what you have in your property and that it does make sense and tally up with what's there, because that's one of the key things the drive-by people will produce is made up circuit charts and results. They don't even go to the trouble of checking, or they copy and paste from the last report. So make sure you check that, a really simple thing that you can do yourselves. But to help you select somebody who is going to do the work properly, I've got some key tips for you and I'm going to run through them now. So one is to check that they are approved contractors, and that's with the NIC or NAPIT or somebody like that. And that's not a bulletproof guarantee that you're going to get somebody reputable, but it's a good starting point. They have had a third party check that's based on the UCAS assessment procedure, so that's well worth making sure you go to those particular registers and select a contractor from there. Another is to make sure that they are insured, so ask to see copies of their insurance, both for public liability and professional indemnity. They should have both whilst carrying out EICRs. You can ask to see copies of certificates and qualifications. Most electricians have been more than happy to show you those. I know I'm always happy to show my certificates to people who work damn hard for them. And specifically around inspection and testing, that would be to do with an MVQ and apprenticeship, and then a 239 one as it's called today, to make sure that they've undertaken some supplementary training on inspection and testing and make sure they have the appropriate experience and qualifications to do that. You can also check that they have, for example, a JRB Gold card. So that's another one that an electrician would be more than happy to show you, and that's that they meet the required standards of the Joint Industry Board to be an approved electrician. A big one is customer and client referrals. So if you know other people who are using electricians to have EICRs carried out, ask them about the service they've received. Ask them how long the electricians are typically within the properties, how many they get through per day, for example. And the big question you need to really ask yourself is, what represents the best value to you? Is it getting that quick £80–90 win and a certificate that says your property's safe so you can continue letting it? Or is it paying to have the property correctly inspected and tested, to have any defects identified and then rectified, and make sure that you are on the right side of the law in the event of a problem? So I would suggest you seriously consider what represents the best value in that circumstance. So then, pulling all this back together, an electrician will generally have to run through the observations they've made and the test results they've recorded, input that data into a laptop or iPad for example, and then they can produce a certificate which they can forward on to yourself for review. You should always get a copy of that certificate. And if there has been things identified that aren't quite right, you have 28 days to take action against them, so that's remedial works. Make sure you have those put back into order so you can continue letting the property. So yeah, you can see here that there's like a big range of works, and it doesn't justify somebody taking less than an hour to complete the work. That's the kind of point I want to keep re-emphasising within this. And we've said about the word limb being quite a common one all through the process of your EICR, and that's a big red flag that you need to watch out for within the reports you're receiving. And the other thing is just to go on personal recommendation, trust your instincts, make sure you do some due diligence, because at the point in time where there is an issue, you will be definitely wishing you had done. So that's my key advice to you there. I hope you've enjoyed looking through what an EICR actually should look like on site, and hopefully this explains why it does take a certain amount of time. It is not like a gas safety inspection where those measurements and checks that gas engineers are doing are from a boiler, for example. You know, whilst that is an important safety aspect within the installation as well, it's not the same thing. We are checking an entire electrical installation system within your property. And if you just think about that gas system within your home in that one particular location, as opposed to all of the points of consumption you've got in an electrical installation, you can see hopefully why that's not the same thing. So yeah, I hope that that's been of some use. I hope it's helped some electricians as well with a way of explaining to clients what is actually involved and why you are charging the rates that you're putting forward. And ultimately, I hope that we can all ensure that homes are safer. I think that PRS has been a good thing. I think based on what we've pulled out as a company over the last few months, certainly, I mean, we found some shockers, and most of the properties we inspect don't get satisfactory reports. That's just the nature of inspections that take place. You know, you have damages that are unavoidable just through user interaction over the years, and you have things that have never been installed in the right way or DIY additions. So having that potentially dangerous electrical things pulled out through the course of PRS is a good thing. And I think we need to focus in on that, and we need to try and raise awareness throughout the industry of what a proper EICR should look like, and get that into clients' minds as clearly as we possibly can. So I would encourage other electricians to produce articles or videos like this, and we can try and share them around and get people engaged within industry to try and put this right and make sure that it's not been devalued to the point of being a worthless bit of paper that people just want to, you know, chuck at the local letting agent and say they've complied with PRS. It's an opportunity for us all to raise the standard of electrical installations across the country, and who knows, perhaps push this into other domestic property, because I certainly think homeowner property that sometimes isn't getting inspected at all, if we're honest, you know, is a key area we can improve electrical safety. And when we're seeing the figures of electrical fires in domestic property every year, you know, it's a red flag that we need to be doing something. We can do better, and I think the process of carrying out EICRs is the way to do it. So anyway, thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll catch up with you all again soon.